What we see, some of the things we see, mistakes that we see companies making or pitfalls, it's very nuanced, but the pitfalls we see is a few. One, people generalize the TAM, particularly if you're going into Asia, if you're going into Europe. So they think the TAM is X and the TAM of course is X, but an opportunity in Germany is very different than an opportunity in the UK, which is very different than an opportunity in the Nordics. Sounds very obvious, but how they buy, how they think about buying, how they demo products, how they want to be sold to is very nuanced. And so there's a large issue around generalizing the TAM, and our view is you really need to localize the TAM to be effective. So that's point one. Point two is people overhire. And so there's the view that they overhire, they hire GM, head of, and at that level, at that stage of a company, you really need execution. And most of our clients have a pretty good perspective on their strategy, so they need execution. They need the first few logos and the initial momentum in the space, and to really sort of pulse check the market, and then start to overhire and scale. And so we see a lot of companies overhire, make a mistake, and there's a cultural issue around sort of us versus them, and they spend forever caught in this sort of cultural circle, and they miss the opportunity of really focusing on execution. So that's the second point. Third point, going back on the cultural piece, is people underestimate the nuance of the cultural differences in the local markets. And so, as everybody knows, South Korea is very different than Japan, which is very different than Singapore, Australia, as an example. Is of course the same thing in Europe and even in the US, right? So how you engage with the company in California is very different than how you engage with the company in New York, and it's even more so how you engage with the Spanish company versus how you engage with the company in Germany. And people generalize that, or they take the path of least resistance, which is let's plant a team of people in country X and go after it. And they get that wrong most of the time. It was tough before, it's very localized now post-COVID. So people aren't traveling as much from a business perspective. People are staying local, but people even more so, more xenophobic than they've ever been. So people buy from their own culture. It's getting more that way versus less. And therefore you really need to be local to be effective.